On Notice is a podcast from Notice, hosted by Reese Gorman and presented by BP.
It's very challenging to be a lawmaker at this time. Of course, we know this war was started and is continuing without congressional authorization. It's wildly illegal. So, my colleagues and I continue to have massive concerns, and we still don't even have an off-ramp. I mean, the president changes his tune every single day on this.
Hi, I'm Daniela Diaz, a congressional reporter at Notice, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, Arizona Congresswoman Yasamin Ansari is on Notice. At 33, Ansari is one of the youngest members of the House. Fun fact, she was an intern for Nancy Pelosi. She is in her first term, replacing Ruben Gallego when he ran for Senate. She is also the first, and at the moment only, Iranian-American Democrat in Congress with relatives living overseas. So for her, the conflict in Iran is quite personal, and she has a lot of thoughts about it. We'll talk about that and much more right after the break.
Behind the delivery trucks that keep your life stocked, thousands of BP employees go to work every day. People discovering oil and natural gas onshore and off. People refining it into products you rely on. People shipping fuel where our customers need it. And people helping drivers fill up at our convenient locations. They're part of around 300,000 jobs we support across the country. See all the ways BP is driving American energy forward at bp.com/investing in America.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start with you telling the New York Times that you actually had a great aunt, 90 years old, living in Tehran, whom your family has been unable to reach since the strikes began. Have you been able to reach her?
Yeah, in recent days, my mom has been able to contact her. The challenge generally is that the regime in Iran tends to cut out the internet. They did so during the massacres in January, where they killed tens of thousands of Iranian civilians, but they've also done it quite a few times during the war. And that is really how they, control and surveil the population. So that's the major challenge that a lot of people here in the diaspora have, and how, Iranians have that challenge living in Iran, not being able to get the truth about what's happening out to the world.
You're the first Iranian American Democrat in office with the war in Iran. What do your conversations with your colleagues look like as information on the ground is so difficult to get a hold of? You just mentioned that the internet has been blacked out.
I found my colleagues to be very supportive and very eager to learn about what's going on. Even before any of this began, I think a lot of the colleagues I have, especially in the Democratic caucus, have been really interested in just learning more. I think Iran always has been, after 40 some years of hostile relationships between the US and the country, kind of a black box, right? People don't know what really goes on. Some people may equate the regime with the population. And so I've really appreciated the fact that my colleagues, have a lot of questions. Since the war has started, I think I've been able to provide a perspective of, what people are thinking and talking about, whether Iranians inside Iran and or outside of the country. Especially at the outset of the war, there was definitely, somewhat similar to what happened with Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. There was excitement. I mean, the Ayatollah being killed, this is somebody who has been a brutal dictator for many years and has a lot of blood on his hands. So there was a lot of celebration about that. And as time has gone on, I think, very mixed emotions, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, but also some hope, because this is kind of the first time that Iranians have seen outside intervention of some sort. Now, my opinions on how that intervention has been done and whether or not it's in the US's national security interest, that's a different story. But I think providing that context has been helpful, I think, to my colleagues, and also, an important why representation is so important in Congress at all.
But it must be an interesting role that you're playing, considering as the only Iranian Democrat, having to maybe educate some of your colleagues on what's happening. How does that play out? Is it something that you think is important for you to do, or maybe have your colleagues more rely on intelligence, anything else that's happening in Iran?
Yeah, I think the most challenging part really first and foremost, my job is to represent my district and the perspectives of my district. We conducted a poll within Arizona's third, which is primarily Phoenix, and about 1,200 people responded to whether or not they support or oppose the war, and about 74% oppose the war. I've talked to a lot of my constituents about this, from 18-year-olds who are part of carpenter apprenticeship programs who are terrified about the possibility of having to go to war with boots on the ground, who are concerned about gas prices being $5 a gallon. I've also spoken with just young people in general who don't understand why, yet again, the US is embarking in yet another conflict in the Middle East and, dealing with a president who clearly has no plan for it. Now, when it comes to, the perspective of Iranians or Iranian Americans, and as it pertains to my colleagues, of course, intelligence is the most important thing. Now, I will say with this administration, it's been very challenging to be briefed on even matters as grave as war. There have only been a handful of briefings that we've had, and from my experience with these classified briefings, you have, senior level cabinet officials. They run the clock to the extent possible, want to answer as few questions as possible, and we continue to get mixed messages from this administration. So it's very challenging to be a lawmaker at this time. Of course, we know this war was started and is continuing without congressional authorization. It's wildly, wildly illegal. So, my colleagues and I continue to have massive concerns, and we still don't even have an off ramp. I mean, the president changes his tune every single day on this.
Do you support potentially a supplemental? I mean, you called the world illegal, I assume no, but I'm curious what you think about the fact that that's a conversation that's happening right now.
I do not. I mean, to this day, there's been no justification made to the American people about why we engaged in this war in the first place. And look at the consequences already. I mean, the fact that you have had thousands of civilian casualties in Iran, in Lebanon. I mean, Lebanon has been, less talked about, but the strikes that have occurred in the country from Israel, in retaliation, et cetera, have been severe. Over 1 million people have been displaced. More than a dozen American service members have been killed. There's troops on the way to the Middle East. But then at the same time, Donald Trump makes statements saying, we're negotiating with somebody in the regime. He will be co controlling the Strait of Hormuz with the Ayatollah. I mean, this is out of control. This is a very incompetent administration. So there's absolutely no world in which I would support any funding for this illegal war.
What do you think that the Trump administration should do to actually solve this issue, considering there's been mixed messages about why they're doing this in the first place?
Well, first and foremost, we need a very clear justification and case made to the American people about what this was about. I mean, to start a war requires an imminent national security threat to the country. And it does not appear, whether it be the intelligence that, we have seen or with what has been stated publicly, that there was an imminent threat at all. We've, of course, heard that the mission had to do with the nuclear program, the Navy, the ballistic missiles program, and then sometimes it's about regime change. So it's very, very unclear what it's about. I think we need a very clear off ramp at this point, one that will protect civilian lives across the region, American lives, one that does not, I think also my fear is that we're going to leave Iranians inside the country in an even worse place than where they started. There's, when the worst case scenario would be to have an even more hardline regime. So that's something that I continue to be concerned about.
A lot of Iranians have actually celebrated the Ayatollah's death, and it seems that there's a lot of mixed messages about what this war, this as happening in Iran, what it means for Iranians in America, American Iranians, or just for the future of Iran. Can you explain those two sides and why, maybe, and you even mentioned at the beginning that when I saw interviews that you were also, around family members that were also grateful that the regime fell. But could you explain those two sides and why they go together? Maybe celebration for the death of the Ayatollah, but then also what's next for the country?
What's different about the regime in Iran with the Islamic Republic is that it's not just one person. Like the Ayatollah being killed, while is very much worth celebrating, that doesn't mean the regime has changed or the regime has fallen. You know, Donald Trump said something of that sort. That is not at all the case. The regime and the IRGC, which is like the Revolutionary Guards, the Basij, which is the paramilitary force in Iran, it encompasses a lot of people, and there's a lot of corruption. A lot of people, some are very ideologically minded, religious fundamentalists. Some are simply, part of the system and have made record, profits. A lot of corruption from, let's say the sanctions that the US has put. What has really happened is that ordinary people have suffered in Iran, and people who are part of this regime have really co-opted that and made money off of it. So the challenge now is what happens next? Like, who is in charge now? There's already been another Ayatollah who has been appointed. And there's a lot of concern that, again, the next iteration of this regime will be even more hardline than they were prior, because now they have been, we've seen so much civilian infrastructure be attacked. There's, you know, if they get through this war and the United States and Israel kind of retreat and they're still in power, I think there's a grave concern that they could really double down and become even more repressive.
To add to that, I read your interview in the New York Times. You mentioned in that interview that the Shah's son is a worthwhile idea to consider for ruling in Iran. Could you elaborate on that?
So, specifically, he has committed to being a transitional leader and helping to transition the country to whatever the next phase will be. I believe, just to be very clear, that there needs to be free and fair elections and that Iranians should decide who their leader is. I mean, this is a country of 90 million people, very diverse country with different ethnicities, different religions. And so it's, I would say, going to be one of the most challenging countries really to lead, especially after, one day, hopefully, there is a democratic transition. So I think he certainly has some, support, undeniably so, to be part of that transition. But I certainly don't think he's the only one. There's been some movement recently in terms of creating a coalition. I know he recently appointed a woman named Shireen Abadi, who's, former Nobel laureate, and to like kind of lead in developing a plan for the future. And I think that type of work is really what's important in the Iranian opposition, which quite frankly hasn't existed the way that it should in order to be successful. Like really creating a unified coalition that's representative of the diversity of the country. And, ultimately, I think change does need to come from within. I don't think foreign imposed intervention and like propping up of, another leader is the way to go at all. History shows us that. I'm not just saying that. It's not my opinion. It's what history has shown us is not successful. And there needs to be a ground game inside of a country in order to have that sort of success.
Is there something that you think is really important for anyone watching this podcast, listening to this podcast, to know about the conflict that I didn't ask you?
On this particular issue, I would just remember that it's very nuanced and complicated in terms of the emotions that are involved. There's certainly a lot of trauma that Iranians have after some 40, 50 years almost of being held hostage by a truly, truly brutal government. I think sometimes, from the West perspective, and especially as Democrats, this could seem like we are, I don't know. I have seen perspectives that I disagree with that have to do with like the Iranian regime standing up to the West. And that's where I would be careful. This is a really brutal regime. They quite literally murdered tens of thousands of their own people in January, and they will do anything to stay in power. And I think Donald Trump really did not expect that. I think he thought this would be a lot easier than it was. And I think really this is a prime example of how naive and incompetent him and his administration are. I think they thought they could just, kill a few people and the people who are part of this regime would cut a deal and he could call it a win. And that has clearly not been the case. And now we're seeing the devastating consequences.
Thank you so much. And let's take a quick break and we'll be back with more on Notice.
Behind every BP fill-up, thousands of people across America go to work every day. From the people producing oil and gas in the Gulf today, to those discovering resources we'll need tomorrow, to the people refining our fuels, all the way to the people who help you at one of BP's family of retail stations. They're part of around 300,000 U.S. jobs BP supports across the country. See all the ways BP is driving American energy forward at bp.com/investing in America.
Now we're going to take a little bit of a topic change. You serve on the House Oversight Committee. It's clearly been in the news every week, especially what Democrats have been doing in trying to investigate the Epstein files. You've been playing a role on this committee with the depositions, playing against Republicans and fighting back and trying to get answers about these files. Are you confident at all that Congress will even ever get the full story?
Really good question. I think that we are very much at the beginning of this investigation. And every time we get more files or every time we conduct a deposition with somebody who was in Jeffrey Epstein's inner circle or related or had a relationship, it becomes very clear that this cover up is extremely vast and has spanned decades. So I am confident that one day, under a Democratic presidency and a Democratic Department of Justice, there absolutely will be accountability. I know that I will be supporting a candidate who really pledges to ensure that there is accountability. If somebody committed a crime, they need to be investigated. I think one of the, most concerning and just troubling parts of this entire process has been to see how many allegations exist within even the files that we do have that have never properly been investigated and people have not been held accountable in the United States. So I think yes, but it's going to be a long-term project.
There's a lot of names in the files, and you said that a lot of people have not been investigated, people that are in these files. What can Democrats on the House Oversight Committee do to try to bring justice to the victims, considering a lot of people have not been investigated for their role in the Epstein files?
I think we absolutely need to continue with the subpoenas and the depositions with, regarding anyone who may have been involved or enabled these crimes. The most recent ones that we've had include Les Wexner, Darren Indyke, and Richard Kahn, and they've been very informative, but again, very clearly part of the cover up of this whole thing. The moment we are in the majority, there are many more subpoenas coming. One of the most important parts of this story where I think accountability has failed have to do with the financial institutions, the banks who, you know, look the other way when very, very questionable transactions were being made. And we have only been able to subpoena two of the financial institutions that are part of a longer list who were part of this massive cover up. And so we really just need to like break down how this became possible, look at this entire network and hold people accountable. And I think, again, there's a lot that we're doing now, but when we are in the majority, we have to make sure to double down on this and actually bring people forward and hold them accountable.
I have two last questions for you. You're part of a new generation of Democrats who have been very visible and very vocal. Meanwhile, the party is in a genuine leadership vacuum. There is no clear 2028 frontrunner. It's an aging bench at the top, and there's real pressure from voters who want fresh faces. Who do you think has the power or what it takes to lead the party forward? Is there anyone in specific that you'd like to see in 2028 run for president?
I honestly am really excited for a competitive primary. Like, yes, there are people that I really like. I like do not buy into the fact that we don't have a deep bench. I think we have a phenomenal bench right now in the Democratic Party. I think from, the possibility of a president AOC to my senators who are probably thinking about running to, governors across the country who I think would be phenomenal. Like, I am excited for a 2020 style primary where we really can compete and have people just have the best person come to the top because like we really cannot afford to just kind of appoint someone. It's going to have to be someone with a bold vision, someone who can really speak to the issues that this country is facing from like unprecedented corruption and authoritarianism and provide real solutions to how they are going to solve people's problems.
There's no one in specific that you're interested in? You mentioned, Arizona is definitely everyone's watching that state and your senators.
Yeah, I mean, I love both of my senators. I tend to gravitate towards women and young progressive women. Would be so excited about the possibility of an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez running. But again, I those are three of my favorites. I know, in the past there's been talk of Governor Whitmer, someone I really like, Governor Bashir. I mean, again, there's a lot of people who are phenomenal and have a lot of potential.
I have a fun one for you to wrap the podcast. You were Nancy Pelosi's intern. Now you are working with her in the House of Representatives. Could you talk to me a little bit about what that's like?
Yeah, it's very surreal. I actually on my wall have my certificate from that time period of working with her. I mean, I was an intern in her district office. I was a sophomore in college. So I would drive from her office was in San Francisco and I went to school in the Bay Area. So I would drive a couple times a week to go intern. But yeah, it's been super surreal. When she called to congratulate me when I won, I brought it up. And I serve as the freshman class president as well. And one of the most meaningful experiences I've had over the last year or so that I've been here was organizing a dinner for the freshman class with Speaker Emerita Pelosi. And it was just so wonderful. And she, is so inspirational. And like all of us continue, I think for everyone here, it feels surreal and we all still get starstruck by her and her story and just how impressive and talented she is. And then after that dinner, she organized another dinner, moderated conversation with President Obama. So these are some of the top experiences I've had. So I'm just very grateful for her. She like really takes on the mentorship role and provides so much solid advice and really wants to see new members grow.
Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
On Notice is a production of Notice and is hosted by me, Reese Gorman. This show is produced by Notice and the team at the Podglomerate. A very special thanks to Kate Nocera, Justin Pellegrini, and Deirdre Walsh. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You could send us a note at podcast@notus.com. And if you like this episode, leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts. See you next week.
Behind the delivery trucks that keep your life stocked, thousands of BP employees go to work every day. People discovering oil and natural gas onshore and off. People refining it into products you rely on. People shipping fuel where our customers need it. And people helping drivers fill up at our convenient locations. They're part of around 300,000 jobs we support across the country. See all the ways BP is driving American energy forward at bp.com/investing in America.